Thank you, Abby. As you just heard, that this meeting is being recorded. So please identify yourself when you are speaking, so we know who's speaking. And then those of you joining us virtually, you have the option to turn on closed captioning. If you look for the icon with a little text bubble that says CC, click on that, and then you can activate the closed captioning. And then also you are able to lock up to six windows, video windows, to your view. And by going up to the window and clicking the more options, which is the three dots, and then you can lock that in place. All right, next slide. So I'm going to go over just some information overview about the RFAs. So the applications opened up October 1st for both the RFAs for community action programs and homeless crisis response system. The agencies that are identified under the 501c3 nonprofit are able to apply for these funds. Private individuals and for-profit organizations are not eligible for this funding. These RFAs are for the contract period of July 1st, 2025, and they go for 2 years, which will end June 30th, 2027, but have the possibility for a year extension that would push the end date to June 30th, 2028. And when you are applying for these funding through these RFAs, please provide a yearly figure for the funding amount. And then the applications are submitted through Bonfire. So the RFAs, there's two of them. The first one is the Community Action Program RFA, and these programs support anti-poverty for their clients and help reach self-sufficiency. So examples of those are the dental assistance, food assistance, credit repair, financial planning / budgeting services, and transportation assistance. And then the next RFA is the Homeless Crisis Response System. And these support individuals that are at risk or experiencing homelessness. And examples of those are the Rapid Rehousing Program, Permanent Supportive Housing, Street Outreach, Homeless Prevention, Temporary Housing Interventions, and then the core supports. And later on in this presentation, we'll go more in detail of those programs. Some important dates to note. So the pre-application is due November 1st by 11:30 p.m. The pre-application is submitted through email. We'll provide a little bit more information on that later on. And then the deadline to submit questions is December 27th by 5 p.m. No questions will be taken after that deadline. The full application is due January 3rd by 11:30 p.m. And then staff will review and possibly request additional information. This will occur in January and February of next year. And then agencies are asked to present about the program that they are requesting funds for to the Community Action Advisory Board, and that will occur in March or April of next year. Then the CAB will provide their recommendations about the programs May 7th of next year, and then that will follow with the Clark County Council approving the programs by May 2025, and then that will lead to the contract negotiations for those programs in June. And then finally, the contracts will start July 1st of next year. So the pre-application is downloaded through the Bonfire website. You are submitting that pre-application through email and not through Bonfire. So all the community action program pre-applications will be sent to Abby Malloy, and her email address is right there. And then all the homeless crisis response system pre-applications will be sent to Kayla Williams.
Luis, I want to jump in for a
Sure.
quick second and share. If you are submitting an application to our homeless crisis response system this year, it will look different, the pre-applications. In previous years, you were asked to submit a pre-application for every single program type. This year, we are asking that you submit one single pre-application per individual agency. This should, alleviate the need for you guys to create duplicate documentation and extra work. So in that pre-application, you will see a request to provide information on each individual program type you'll be applying for and provide a budget for each individual program you'll be applying for annually, but only one pre-application per agency this year.
So we will be holding 2 technical assistance sessions where agencies can join the virtual meeting and drop in and ask any questions that they may have. The links are provided here on the PowerPoint, and they're also provided on the Bonfire website. So the first one's October 29th from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. And then the second one will be held December 2nd from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then, so questions regarding the RFA should be submitted through Bonfire, and then the answers will be provided within 2 business days following. And again, the deadline for questions is the December 27th of this year by 5 p.m. And then you can contact Abby to be added to the stakeholders list so you can be informed on future funding opportunities. So some information about the application submission process. So to begin with, on the Clark County website, you will see, you can follow this link and you will see 2 buttons that show the application link. This will send you over to the Bonfire website portal where you can see the 2 opportunities, and that shows you the RFA links. So you don't need to sign up for an account to view this web page, but once you go into them, you do need to register or log in if you're an existing member to download and view and submit the documentation that's provided and required. So when you click on the view opportunity from the last slide, this will send you over to this. This shows you all the documentation that we provide for the RFA submission process. These are documents that you're going to refer to when answering the questions on the applications, and then some forms that you need to fill out to submit for the application itself. This slide shows, if you scroll down on the web page, you'll reach this section. It shows you the required points of the application. So make sure to download and fill out those required documents. For the optional documentations, these are provided for the agencies that will have letters of collaboration or in-kind valuation forms for other funds that go with their application. As I mentioned before, all the questions regarding the RFA need to go through Bonfire. So if you send an email with a question, we're either going to post that question ourselves on the website and then answer them there, or ask you to please submit it through Bonfire so we can provide you an answer. Oh, and then Bonfire actually does provide some technical assistance. They have a little blue question mark on the website. You can click on that for additional information. It might help a question that you may have for the website. And some tips for the applications. So download everything, read it once, twice, be familiar with the information that's being provided. Some of the questions that are asked are going to be referencing some of those documents. So the more familiar you are with those, the better answers you can provide. The applications are being reviewed by community members. So it's important to provide information that everyone can understand. So the use of acronyms and work lingo that you may add, someone might not understand what that means, and then there'll be questions, and it'd just be easier and faster process if the person reviewing your application understands what you're talking about. So the documents, as I mentioned before, they're going to be referenced on some of the questions. So make sure to read those. The collaboration, we'll touch a little bit more on that in the coming slides. Focus on the program when you are answering the questions and not so much on the agency. We want to know what the program is going to be providing, and yeah, just be clear on those questions. And applications that don't meet the intent of the RFA are not going to be approved and pushed onto the review process. So just make sure that the program that you are applying funds for fits the criteria of the RFA. A little information on outputs versus outcomes. So outputs are the actions that are being provided by the agencies. The outcomes are those actions coming together for the product of those outputs. So the outputs and outcomes that are added to the application from the agency, those are the ones that we are going to be using for writing up the contract. So make sure that you are providing the appropriate outputs and outcomes, and we will use those later on to evaluate the program. So coordinate versus collaborate. This is kind of just a straightforward chart showing what these topics are and what they aren't. We're looking for agencies to collaborate with one another and not just coordinate tasks between each other. We will be reviewing and the collaboration letters that are submitted to make sure that there is an emphasis on integration between the agencies that are collaborated together. So in other words, we don't want agencies doing individual services side by side, but rather creating a true essence of collaboration in their approach to service delivery. The evaluation and selection of the applications. There will be an administrative review that will be conducted for new agencies once the pre-application is submitted. There may be additional documentation that's requested by us. And then the evaluation, scoring, and recommendations will be completed by the CAB, which is the Community Action Advisory Board, and that will occur in May. If you follow this link, there's more information about the board. The applications are scored on a 100-point system. The amount of points available per question are indicated in the application and guidance document. Some questions are scored based on specific criteria, which is included in the question. And then finally, there will be risk assessments that will be completed for the awarded agencies before the contracts are executed. And then I will pass it on to Abby.
Thank you so much, Luis. So before we get into the specifics of the different application types, does anyone have any questions on that general overview that we went over? All right, hearing none, let's move on to some information about the Community Action Program. So these funds for the Community Action Program come from the Community Services Block Grant, which aims to eliminate the causes and ameliorate the conditions of poverty. These funds are distributed to designated community action agencies across the nation. And in our area, Clark County Community Services is the designated community action agency for all of Clark County. So we receive these funds, and the current program eligibility allows services to households earning up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And we receive allocations from both the state and federal government, which are both combined into this request for applications. All community action agencies are required to conduct an assessment of the needs of people living in poverty every 3 years. Our most recent community needs assessment was completed this year and includes direct feedback from 893 surveys of people and households with low incomes, which covered 7 areas of need, including education, employment, physical health, behavioral health, housing, income and asset building, and support services. And then we also hosted a number of community forums throughout the county and analyzed various other reports and data, including census data, to put together this report. So the RFA is funding categories and services that were the most frequently identified needs in the city, and for which there are no or inadequate sources of funding in the community. So although there were obviously areas of need in each of the community needs assessment categories, this RFA is funding categories and services that were the most frequently identified. So eligible activities for this request for application include physical health targeting dental services, physical health targeting food assistance, income and asset building targeting credit repair, or income and asset building targeting financial planning and or budgeting assistance, and also support services targeting transportation assistance. So any applications we receive outside of these 5 target areas will not be accepted. The following high need activities are being funded outside of this application. So all housing assistance is being funded through the Homeless Crisis Response System RFA, which Kayla will talk about in more detail shortly. All legal assistance is funded through Clark County Volunteer Lawyers Program, and information and referral services are funded through 211 Info. So these funds cannot be used for rent assistance. That's through the Homeless Crisis Response System. It can't be used for services to households earning over the designated income threshold or 200% of the federal poverty level. We can't provide services that can be reimbursed through Medicaid or Medicare. Can't be used for construction, rehabilitation, or maintenance of property, or purchase of assets, including equipment and or vehicles. So for this year, we have approximately $284,000 available per fiscal year. This funding amount is approximate because it's based on, how much we end up receiving each year from the state and federal government, but that's our estimate. So the minimum request for this request for applications is $40,000, and the maximum request is the maximum funds available in each category. So for physical health, we have approximately $113,500 available per fiscal year. For the income and asset building category, we have approximately $99,500 available per fiscal year. And in support services, we have about $71,000 available per fiscal year. So those would be the maximum application amounts if you're applying in each of those categories. So proposals So eligible agencies are required to meet the following criteria. They must participate in E-Verify, be registered with sam.gov in good standing, and demonstrate a fiscal capacity for a cost reimbursement contract. Typically, it takes about 30 days for agencies to be reimbursed after invoicing. So agencies have to be able to, keep 30 days of funds available. And all proposals submitted in response to this RFA must follow the below general requirements, and all requirements will be incorporated into the contracts of selected proposals. So they must address a need identified in the 2024 Community Needs Assessment, which we already talked about what those were. Contract performance has to take place in Clark County and serve people who live in Clark County. Programs will be required to enter accurate data into the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, and no more than 10 days following enrollment into the program and by the 5th day of following services provided. Some additional program requirements. Programs must be able to report unduplicated persons and households served. We ask for quarterly reports and year-end narrative reports to be completed and submitted to the county. Program reports must include all grievance information filed during the reporting period and the status of those resolutions. All programs need to include peer support, a trauma-informed approach, motivational interviewing, and cultural awareness. They must promote dignity and respect by meeting the following criteria. I'm not going to read through all of these bullet points, but we'll be sending the slides out to you all, and this meeting will also be recorded if you want to come back to these. And these are also in our guidance documents and the Clark County General Terms and Conditions. A few more requirements. Programs are required to provide or assist household with connections to other community resources and supports to help them achieve their long-term goals. They must be staffed by Corp employees who are suitably trained to effectively utilize HMIS and use trauma-informed services. And staff should also provide great customer service to ensure the program offers services in a culturally aware and appropriate manner to each program participant. All agencies submitting proposals must take active steps to help their organizations and programs become more culturally competent and aware and improve delivery of services to historically underserved communities in Clark County. And in addition to this, programs must follow all requirements in the Clark County General Terms and Conditions, which are available on our website and also linked in the guidance documents in Bonfire, as well as our guidance document that is posted on the website. There's a few other documents that will be submitted with the main application questionnaire. These include an anti-lobbying certification, a conflict of interest form, a debarment form, and a copy of the E-Verify MOU. Most of these top 3 are available in Bonfire, and then for submitting the E-Verify MOU, that's something you download from the E-Verify website. Programs are also required to follow fair housing standards, have registration with sam.gov, and meet the following insurance requirements, which include commercial general liability, automotive liability, workers' comp, professional liability, and sexual molestation. So here are some additional reference documents. These are linked on the slides, which again will be sent out to you all. They're also all on the website and all in Bonfire. And these just include some documents you can reference for filling out the questionnaire or those templates that I mentioned for those forms that you'll be submitting. So for more information, I highly, highly recommend looking at the Community Action Program funding guidance document that we've put together. This is a really comprehensive guide to the whole application process. It talks about program eligibility, all those requirements that I went over, and it breaks down every questionnaire question into each section. It talks about what we're looking for in terms of answers and how many points are awarded for each question. So this is a really useful resource, and it can be found on the application website, which is clark.wa.gov/community services/applications. And then there's this big blue button that says CAP application and funding guidance. And there's another one for the homeless crisis response system as well on the website. And then it's also in the bonfire portal and labeled CAP RFA description and guidance form. And you'll also be signing this form and submitting it with your application as a demonstration that you understand all the program requirements. So now we have an opportunity for questions about the Community Action Program RFA. Feel free to ask questions now, and then after today, any questions will be submitted through the Q&A section of Bonfire. And like Louis said, we'll respond to questions within 2 business days, and the deadline for those questions is December 27th. So any questions before we move on to the homeless crisis response system? Yeah.
Amy Reynolds from Share. The categories, do you know how those compare to budget amounts to 3 years ago?
I could pull that up. It's pretty similar since the data that we collected in the previous community needs assessment, which was done in 2020, was really similar to the 2024 needs assessment. And we allocated the budget categories based on the percentage of people who identified those areas as a high need. So the funding is allocated proportionally to what we identified as needs in the community. So they were adjusted a bit to reflect the most recent community needs assessment, but it is pretty similar to the last one. Any other questions? I am not seeing any online, so I'll pass it off to Kayla. But again, if you end up having any questions, feel free to submit those through Bonfire.
Alrighty, my name is Kayla Williams, and I will be telling you about our homeless crisis response system, RFA. So we will have approximately $5.3 million of funding available per fiscal year. Contracts will run from July of 2025 to June of 2027 with the option of an extension for 1 additional fiscal year. We have 6 categories that we are soliciting services for. Those are rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, street outreach, homelessness prevention, emergency shelter / transitional housing, which are under the same bucket, and then core supports or SOAR. And then one note for providers, if you currently have an EPRAP contract, this year we will not be offering that 3rd-year extension that we tend to with all of our homeless crisis response system contracts. So you are required to come in for this RFA for the fiscal year 26 through 28 funding. All right, we use 2 different kinds of funding sources for the bulk of our programs. That is Houseful, which are our local document recording fees, and then our system demonstration grant, which is what we receive from the Washington State Department of Commerce. All of our agencies that are coming in for applications should be very well versed in the SDG guidelines. They are what we at the county utilize to monitor contract adherence, and they have all of the eligibility requirements and homelessness definitions in there. So number one thing I would say when you are beginning your application is to make sure you have comfortability in knowing how to navigate the SDG guidelines, and those are linked here. All proposals need to meet the below general requirements. So they will, some of these are paralleled with the CAP programs as well. So the general terms and conditions must be met. Contract performance has to take place within Clark County limits. Programs have to enter accurate data into HMIS within the amount of time there. And then there is an exception for households that fall under VAWA. Quarterly reports and year narratives must be completed. The county will provide these reports to you. If you notice anything missing from them, you'll just work with your program contact in getting that navigated. All programs need to include the following components in their design: peer support, trauma-informed approach, motivational interviewing, and cultural awareness. Programs need to provide or assist the household with connections to other community resources and people supports that will help them improve their housing stability, safety, and well-being for their long-term goals. And then staff need to understand how to utilize HMIS as required, as well as trauma-informed services. Programs need to promote dignity and respect. There should be formal policies and value statements that convey clear expectations that persons will be treated with dignity and respect in every interaction. And then agencies are responsible for monitoring their adherence to these expectations. And a grievance file or grievance process must be on file with the agency that is accessible to program participants. The expectations of program participants need to be clearly communicated and easily accessible. Cultural awareness and equity needs to be occurring in all programs to effectively serve the participants across demographic differences. And then only minimal and reasonable requirements for program participants need to be set. So there should be a limit on eligibility criteria, which is set by the county or by the state. If your program has any additional criteria beyond that, it is definitely advised against. But there is a question about that in the RFA as well. Our admin review will be conducted for all agencies. That is our pre-application process that you will email to me. Evaluation and recommendations will be scored by the CAB. More information at that link there. And then these applications are also scored based on a 100-point system. I do want to note that there is a different application questionnaire for each program type. So in your guidance document for the homeless crisis response system, the one that parallels Abby's for the CAP, you will see the different questions based on different program types might have different scores, and all that information is very clearly outlined in that guidance document. So if you have any questions, please submit them to Bonfire so we can share that with the community. All right, now we're going to go through each of the program types that we will be soliciting services for. The first one is permanent supportive housing. PSH is a subsidized, non-time limited housing with supportive services for homeless households. And that those households must include a member with a permanent disability. Within PSH, there is a bucket of funding called the PSH Chronically Homeless Families. And that means that if your agency is contracted any of those dollars can only be spent on households that include a head of household who is chronically homeless and permanently disabled. But we will communicate that more with you if you're coming in for PSH services. PSH may be provided as a rental assistance, scattered site-based or facility-based model. If it is a facility-based model, so one operating similar to that, like the VHA properties, then households need to have a rental or lease agreement on file. And then the services and housing need to be available permanently. Go ahead.
Kayla, real quick, Michael just raised his hand.
Go ahead, Michael.
Never mind, it looks like he lowered it. Michael, did you have something to add?
I did, and thank you. This will be quick. It's really important as you look at the categories and you look at the categories definitions that your program design is meeting that definition. That's the reason Kayla is going through these slides. If you don't, you're not being responsive to the solicitation. Okay, so that's what we mean in terms of if we're soliciting a plane and you offer us a boat, then your application is not moving forward. If the permanent supportive housing that if your program design is for permanent supportive housing and it does not meet all the criteria, all the things that we are listing here, then you're not being responsive to what we are trying to buy, if that makes any sense. And that applies to rapid rehousing. It applies to the temporary housing interventions and everything else. Thank you.
And I will say too that in each of the application questionnaires for each program type, the first question that you will see is the definition that I have provided on the slides, and you will be required to confirm that the program you are presenting meets that definition. So eligibility for PSH, participants must be homeless as defined by the SDG guidelines and be at or below 80% of the AMI. And then the only difference for those CHF households is that the head of household must be chronically homeless and have dependents. And a dependent is defined as a household member who is not the head, co-head, or spouse, but is under the age of 18 years old, disabled, or a full-time student, and then at or below 80% AMI. So rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing moves households from homelessness into permanent housing, and the purpose is to reduce the number of persons experiencing homelessness by getting them into housing and supporting exits into permanent housing. Of course, all these programs are required to collaborate with our Housing Solutions Center, with Council for the Homeless, and accept referrals through coordinated entry. And then the eligibility for rapid rehousing, the participants must be homeless, again, as defined by the SDG guidelines, and at or below 80% AMI. Pay specific note that for some of our programs, the income eligibility requirements are not required for the first 90 days. So for rapid rehousing, they only have to be homeless to access the program. But if they remain in program for 90 days or more, that's when you will have to go in and certify their income meets the requirement of 80% or below. Homeless outreach. Street outreach is a strategy for engaging people experiencing homelessness who are otherwise not accessing services for the purpose of connecting with them or connecting them with emergency shelter, housing, or other critical services. Again, working with the HSC where needed. This is one of those services we really want to see strong collaborations with between agencies. This tends to be one of the ones where some of our households have a lot of needs. And so connecting them with their medical, behavioral health, law enforcement, faith-based organizations is going to be of utmost importance. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Abby. And then we want to see a promotion of evidence-based and best practices related specifically to outreach services, and then complying with any CDC guidance that might be coming out related to street outreach. The eligibility for outreach is that participants must be homeless, at or below 80% AMI, with the caveat that income eligibility requirements are never required if households are only receiving flex funding. And generally for outreach, we see a lot of essential needs, so they would not need to meet the AMI. Go ahead. All right, EPRAP, or eviction prevention rental assistance, helps households who are at risk of homelessness maintain or obtain stable housing and avoid homelessness. Services include housing-focused case management and temporary rent subsidies. So you'll need to work, of course, with HSC again, unless you are a buy-in for agency. There is a different process you'll go through when working with Council for the Homeless to create an internal referral system, but the collaboration still needs to be there with the Housing Solutions Center. And then the eligibility for EPRAP is a little bit different. So participants, again, need to be at risk of becoming homeless as defined by the SDG guidelines, and at or below 60% of the AMI, which does not match the SDG guidelines. Commerce gives communities the opportunity to set their own AMIs for targeting prevention populations, and Clark County has decided to set this target at 60% or below AMI for this program. And then there is one also different aspect for prevention services, and that is the county is required to contract at least 10% of the EPRAP awards to organizations that serve and are substantially governed by marginalized populations or by and for organizations. This last contract period, we were able to contract out about 30%. So you'll see a couple questions are set to make sure that we can get some buy-in-fors engaged in solicit services to keep those funds going into the communities of those underserved. Transitional housing is a subsidized facility-based housing that is designed to promote. Did I already do transitional housing? Was that already here? No, that was PSH, sorry. I'm totally mixing up. Temporary housing and to move households experiencing homelessness into permanent housing. Lease or rental agreements are required for transitional housing between the project and the household. The purpose here is to reduce the number of persons experiencing homelessness by getting them into housing and support exits to permanent housing. Transitional housing is not time limited, but the average length of service is up to 24 months. Eligibility here is that the participants must be homeless and at or below 80% AMI. This is another program type that is exempt from the income eligibility requirements for the first 90 days. So following those 90 days, a recertification of income eligibility needs to be in participant files. And shelter. So emergency shelters is to reduce the number of persons experiencing homelessness by getting them into shelter and supporting exits into permanent housing. Participants need to be homeless and at or below 80% AMI. Shelter is another one of those programs that is income eligible. The income eligibility requirements are not required for the first 90 days of program participation. And then there is an exception for domestic violence shelters, and that is on a case-by-case basis. So if you are operating a domestic violence shelter, just reach out to the county to discuss individuals that may need to stay past 90 days in shelter and our options for not recording their income if that is a necessary component for their circumstances. And then finally, for SOAR, SOAR is our SSI/SSDI outreach, access, and recovery. The purpose is to help end homelessness through increased access to Social Security disability benefits. It's designed to increase access for eligible adults who are homeless or at risk of homelessness and living with a disability. We are hoping to see an increase in the ability for individuals to start their application process and complete their application process because it's very complicated. And people who are homeless tend to have a harder time getting approved. So SOAR helps people navigate the application process and connect them with supportive services. And then we want to see formal collaboration with the coordinated entry system to help program participants promptly access housing services. And then that's it. All right. Homeless crisis response system questions.
I do have a question. In the prevention area, the strength and thing that could be for supportive services after housing or is that to be for issues?
Or
Stuff.
let's maybe repeat the question since the mic's kind of far away.
Oh, yeah. So Adam Kravitz from Outsiders In is asking if the prevention category has an option of being for supportive services. Are you saying after graduating program or?
In the various types of housing.
Okay. Supportive services and various types of housing. No, not at this time. So it's very targeted for homeless or people at risk of homelessness right now only and helping them maintain. The only exception I can think of is individuals who are couch surfing, I believe will technically meet that because they are not homeless, but they meet that at risk. So you could get somebody who's couch surfing into a unit and, you know, connect them with services while they remain eligible for prevention, which can be relatively long term. It depends on your own structure of the program and your agency's capabilities for support. But if they fall into an actual definition of homelessness, they would not be able to be rehoused. They would have to go into a rapid rehousing program. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And I see Beth has her hand raised online. Go ahead, Beth.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? This is okay.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you. Beth Landry, she, her, YWCA, Clark County. I wanted to ask if there was any requirements for shelter in the portions of temporary housing. Like, is that to expand services? Is that for new services? Or is it just sheltering costs based on like the definition? Is it pretty broad or is there any restrictions or anything?
Yeah, so that is for a maintenance. So the shelter services will also include things like motel vouchers, and then an expansion or enhancement of current services. And then there's the transitional housing bucket as well. And something that was not mentioned, but might be important to note for everyone in the system is that we are seeing a reduction in funding across our programs. So keep that, in mind when you are coming in for your applications. I can post the actual percentage reductions if anyone is interested in seeing those. But yeah, just keep that in mind. So that bucket for shelter is relatively small compared to what it was when we did our last RFA cycle.
Yes.
Michael has his hand raised. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, Beth, did that clarify your question?
Thank you.
Okay. So for the shelter piece, if you are operating a current brick and mortar shelter, under contract, that's not part of the solicitation. That's the reason the shelter amount is so low. So this would be like motel vouchers, as Kayla was saying, or if you are operating a current brick and mortar shelter and you're going to add beds, enhance services, something like that, you could apply under this. If you are just continuing your contract as it stands right now, you would not need to apply. The one exception to that is outsiders in St. Paul. You do fall under, you do fall under this solicitation because you've never had to be selected by the county in a competitive RFA solicitation. All our other shelters have at some point in time. So that's and it's it's not a 24-hour shelter. It's there are different reasons why it falls under that criteria. But other than that, I think all the Bertha shelters, the share shelters, all our currently funded brick and mortar shelter contracts will continue.
So right on truth, that's what we're saying. So just so clarifying that we have to go through the administrative review portion of it and to continue, but to be able to be a part of the RFA pool.
Every single agency has to go through the admin review portion. That is the pre-application process.
So, yeah, a brick and mortar shelter that is year round. County supported has been, so what is the difference? I mean, what Michael said.
So what Michael's saying is that because this program, it's not a 24-hour shelter, correct? And it has not been solicited for services before, had to come in, and all of our other shelters have at some point in time. That is why it's not a part of this process.
How did we go through it before? This is what confused me, but we can be part of we have to.
Yeah, Michael, do you have an answer for that? Adam is wanting to know what they didn't do before that they have to do now.
Well, you didn't respond to the county RFA for these shelter services. If we started funding you, like you had a city contract, the city passed that contract to us. We did a solicitation that you did not respond to, and we extended that contract to get you to this RFA, so you can now apply.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Are there any additional questions about anything that we've gone over today? All right, well, hearing none, thank you all for being here. We'll give you all back half an hour of your day. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, please submit those through the Bonfire portal and we'll respond within 2 business days. As a reminder, the next deadline is the pre-application, which is due November 1st. If you're applying for Homeless Crisis Response System, email that to Kayla. If you're applying to Community Action Program, email that to me. And thank you everyone for being here.